Pablo Picasso, the painter that was born to paint. And some consider Pablo to be the greatest of all time, with a career spanning over 80 years. And Picasso was probably the most recognized name in Western art. Let's tell this story further. Picasso was born in 1881 on October the 25th. He had two sisters, and it's alleged that Picasso's birth was a difficult one. And it is alleged that Picasso at birth was saved by his uncle, who was a doctor. Now his father, a painter and teacher, teaches a young Picasso how to paint. And Picasso's family was not poor, as they were middle class. Now in 1885, Picasso attends the School of Fine Arts of La Longa when he moves to Barcelona. And in 1897, he goes to Madrid and attends the Royal Academy of Fine Arts of San Fernando. Unsurprisingly, Picasso shows exceptional artistic talent early. And Picasso was training as an artist the same way a doctor trains in medical school. I mean, I can visualize him in a state of mastery or in the process of mastery, constantly practicing. And at the age of 13, Picasso produced his first oil paintings. And Picasso was impressive. He was impressive from the beginning. The exam for his advanced class took him a week, even though the process would often take others a month. Now, part of the evolution of Picasso is predicated on hard work, and that's an important point. And with regards to environment, Picasso spent over 40 years in Paris, and Paris was famous for its restaurants and cafes. With regards to culture, you had Claude Monet, the inventor of Impressionist painting. And France was known for its style, its sophistication, and its great culture. So we have two important environments to Picasso. We have Spain and we have France. Picasso had different styles which can be characterized as different periods. In a sense, Picasso was a magician with the paintbrush, and he always had new tricks. So let's give a timeline to these periods. So we first had the blue period, which was 1901 to 1904. We then had the rose period, which was 1904 to 1906. We then had the African influence period, which was 1907 to 1909. And then we had Cubism, which was 1909 to 1919. And then we had Neoclassicism and surrealism, which was 1919 to 1932. When I think of these different periods, I think of the metaphor of a car. A car's function is to get you from A to B. Despite this simple function, there are many different cars. In a similar way, there are many different periods of Picasso, but they all reflect Picasso's art. In literal terms, Picasso has always been an artist that does different types of art. Multifaceted, that's a way to describe Picasso's art portfolio. So what is the blue period? This is a good question. These are monochromatic paintings in shades of blue and blue-green. Now Picasso became depressed and his paintings developed more blue tones. This deep dive into blue and depression affected his financial situation. I mean, think of this logically. Who would want to put depressed pieces of art on their wall? And for reference sake, the old guitarist is a good example of the blue period. I mean, the blue period showed, quote, Picasso's sorrow, unquote. And the rose period was something less macabre, because the rose period represented a more happier part of Picasso's life. So in a literal sense, his art manifested his real life. So now let's talk about the African period. This is also known as the Black period, and unsurprisingly, this period is inspired by African art. To be more specific, it is the visual arts of Africa. From what I've discovered, this is referring to sub-Saharan Africa. So, what are the countries in sub-Saharan Africa? So we're talking about Angola, Benin, Botswana, etc. Anyway, this visual art is painting, it's sculpture, it's masks, etc. Now, Picasso's inspiration into African art was inspired by Henri Matisse. Now, Henri Matisse was a leading figure in modern art. Also, a popular book, Heart of Darkness, exposed the mistreatment of Africans in the Belgian Congo. So what does this mean? It means the concept of Africa was in the press and in the minds of the French people. And perhaps Picasso was inspired by the 5 elements of African art, which is the following: the use of the human figure, luster or luminosity, composed demeanour, youthfulness because they did not want to depict any negative vibes, and finally symmetry and balance. Picasso was also inspired by the African masks. These masks were the stimulation for this artistic period. And one could make the following interpretation: Picasso is paying homage to African art by engaging in African art. And this is a great artist acknowledging and being inspired by a great culture. So now let's look at Cubism, which is an artistic movement created by Picasso and another artist known as Georges Bach. In simple terms, Cubism is depictions of humans and other forms in geometric shapes. Here is a basic way to look at it. Cubism is a massive contrast to paintings that represent realism, or should I say, the realism of the Renaissance period. Cubism sees things from multifarious angles. In a fragmented way, Cubism shows things as they are, as opposed to how they are seen. So in theory, you could have a painting of a face with 2 noses because the painting is revealing the nose from 2 different perspectives. So philosophically speaking, Cubism represents a multi-perspective form of reality. So Cubism, metaphorically, is like the atom. You can't see the atom, but you know that it's there. So to conclude this part, Cubism revolutionized art, and Picasso was one of the creators of Cubism. This point is an emphatic one. In 1911, Picasso is exhibiting in Berlin and New York. He is doing exhibitions and he is getting acknowledged. In 1912, Picasso goes to Berlin, Moscow and Munich, and he does exhibitions there as well. Picasso is getting his art out there in the world. Now in 1913, Picasso's father dies. Now remember, his father was his first teacher. So one would assume that this bereavement would have been a very painful experience. So now let's fast forward to 1925. This is when Picasso started to engage in surrealism art. Some would say this surrealism period was 9 years. Now surrealism in simple terms is, quote, art which sought to release the creative potential in the unconscious mind. End of quote. Now, in practical terms, surrealism can be melting clocks. It could be a face in an eye, or a face in a mouth. It can be seen as beautiful, and it can be seen as weird. This to me is like the next level of creativity. Now, Picasso kept changing his identity. Blue, red, African, Cubanism, surrealism. Artistically speaking, he had many different hands. Now, the blue period represents Picasso's sadness, but despite the sadness, let's not forget that Picasso had financial success in his lifetime. Because in truth, Picasso was economically successful right up until his death. And you may ask the question, what is success? And that's a valid question, but that's a digression. So let's briefly address his economic prosperity. Now, allegedly, at the time of his death, he had 4.5 million in cash and 1.3 million in gold. And it's important to understand that 4.5 million in 1973 is more than 4.5 million in today's market. So how much did a Picasso painting sell for? Well, from what I could see, the highest selling was 179.4 million. And that, from an economic perspective, is truly remarkable. In conclusion, Picasso dominated modern art, and he had so many different expressions. You see, Picasso was not a person who stuck with one style. He had many styles. Now, one of my favorite Picasso statements is, quote, "Painting is another way of keeping a diary," end of quote. In this sense, Picasso's diary documented his life. In this sense, his paintings told a story. And let's make no mistake, Picasso is considered one of the greatest painters of all time. And also he was considered one of the most prolific painters. His catalogue is ridiculously large. Let's give some context. 13,500 paintings, 100,000 prints and engravings, 3,400 book illustrations, and 300 sculptures and ceramics. Final point, Picasso was a real artist, meaning art was his life. And this is evidenced by the fact that Picasso painted until hours before his death. This is the epilogue. Now, Pablo Picasso wrote poetry, as he was also a poet. At age 54 is when Picasso engaged in his poetic journey. Picasso wrote over 300 poems. Now, Picasso also had a collaboration with Jean Milly. Jean Milly was a light innovator, and this collaboration was a series of photographs known as light drawings. Now, Pablo Picasso had respect for childlike paintings, and this is evidenced in the following statement, quote, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child," end of quote. Now, in the last 12 years of his life, Pablo Picasso lived in the village of Morges. I believe that's the right pronunciation, apologies if it's not. This was a 35-room property, and this is where he engaged in the later period. Now, it has been alleged that no one has had more artwork stolen. Considering the prolific artwork, it's unsurprising that this is the case. And let's leave the final words with Picasso. Quote, "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up." End of quote.